All right, welcome back. We are jumping back into it because we've been off for a couple weeks. And so this is actually, I think we just said episode 30.
Yeah.
So.
And we missed 2.
Yeah. Missed 2 sermons.
Schedules and.
Yep. All the conflicts
and
and busyness and stuff in life. Yep. So we are.
People have been crying out.
You know what? Crying is definitely
crying
a
out
good
for
word.
more.
It is. So we're playing a little bit of ketchup.
Yeah.
Not ketchup like, what's something that you put ketchup on? Like
Definitely tater tots.
Tater tots?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Definitely. Like fries, I can take it or leave, I can eat them plain.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's tater tots, gots to have the ketchup. Yeah.
I like good tater tots.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Ketchup. Reagan puts ketchup on her salmon. She likes to put
interesting. Okay.
ranch or ketchup on salmon.
Yeah. Okay.
She loves it.
And
I
could go
about
with that. Yeah,
barf
definitely
every
ranch.
time I see it. No. Oh, are you serious?
Yeah, I could do ranch on anything. Oh, absolutely.
On salmon?
Why not? I've never had it, but why?
I haven't either, but it sounds disgusting. It looks disgusting. The people are not here for this. All right, so we've got to catch up on chapter 16. We started chapter 17 this past week.
Yeah.
But let's do a little bit of catch up on chapter 16. I think we covered, the last one that we covered was the conversion of Lydia.
Yeah.
And what
so
a cool story there.
So good.
But moving into that, it caused a little bit of a stir, or not her conversion, but causing some stir as they go into the town there. So give us a little catch up there.
So anytime what we're finding is the pattern, Paul and Silas or Paul and Barnabas, they go into an area, they share the gospel of Jesus, which is the finished work of salvation. And the Jews, typically they go to a synagogue, or if there's not one, then they, like with Lydia, they went where a prayer gathering was by the river. But either way, they're run out of town typically by somebody. And so that seems to be the way that it goes just about every time. So they are, in Philippi, they are imprisoned, and because they have cast out a spirit of divination in a young girl, and who also there's so much good stuff there. We don't have a lot of backstory. We don't have a lot, but we know that she was liberated from, not only from demon possession, but also possession from these men, because she was telling fortunes, and now she's no longer any good to them. So we don't have a lot about that, but because of all of that going on, they have them thrown into jail unjustly. Find out later that it's illegal to throw a Roman citizen in jail that way, but they are. And so Paul and Silas go willingly. And it's one of those stories where they didn't fight for their freedom. They didn't fight to be released. They didn't argue or complain. They're arrested. They're put into prison because they trust that every step of the way, whether it brings blessings or curses to their lives physically or whatever, they trust that God is ordering every step. And what a template for us, that no matter what happens, when we're walking in the Spirit of God, no matter what happens, bad or good, that God has this in part of His plan. So the very famous story, if you will, they're in prison, they're singing praises, Scripture says singing hymns, they're praying all night long.
Yeah.
It says about midnight, but a lot of people believe it was just all during the night. Mm-hmm. So then the prisoners, there's other prisoners in the jail as well. The jailer, the earthquake happens, and the miraculous earthquake, and we said we know it's an earthquake for 2 reasons. Stop me if you want to stop me anywhere.
Well, so I said a quick recap and some catch up, but there's just so much
there's so much
that you just went blazed right on through, and I know you didn't necessarily want to.
Hey, it's just one more
kind
miracle,
of what we're supposed to do. Instead of having another 50-minute podcast like we can tend to do, it's okay.
Where do you want to go?
Well, so a couple things that stood out that created a lot of conversation, and I know in groups and even outside of groups, just in normal conversation, was the demonic possession And just questions that arose from that. Did you hear some questions that came up?
Lots of questions and interest from all age groups, because we don't talk about demon possession a whole lot.
Yeah.
Even though we as a church, as myself, I believe you too, we would stand on the theology that we believe that there can be habitation of human beings by a demon, and that would be someone who is not filled with the Spirit and who is inhabited by the Spirit of God, that someone who is not giving themselves to Christ can be possessed by a demon, which even just saying it out loud, we know brings questions, and because we don't see or hear of it very much, but it's very evident.
And you can say you don't see or hear a lot of it in our culture
openly
right now.
In our culture.
Yeah.
Even though I believe it's out there, and I believe it's very real, but in other cultures, and a lot of cultures where there is a lot of open spiritual things that happen, where it's very common to, for instance, in Africa, where it's very common to consult witch doctors, but even fortune tellers and those that we would call them like a tarot card reader or something along those lines, are still. That's what this girl was doing. She was giving fortunes or telling futures, and she had a spirit of what was called the spirit of Python, which, because it went back into the Greek mythology, but it was a spirit of a demon. And so we believe that it happens. When I say we don't see it, I think it's because we don't have eyes to see it, or in the Western world, it's more hidden. Because the enemy's tactics in the Western world are different than they would be somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where my thinking goes to it, is there are other, I'll say distractions, to use that term lightly. There are other distractions that the enemy uses to get his agenda pushed, that it's not in necessarily demonic possession, maybe oppression or even just influence.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily as commonplace for us to. No, I'm not saying that it doesn't happen,
Right.
but he uses other methods.
Yeah, I've mentioned a couple times that we're studying 1 John on Wednesday mornings in our Bible study here, and in 1 John, the Apostle John literally lays it out and says that you are either a son of God or son of the devil. So perhaps we are looking far too deeply into this thing of those that, because we have such a cinematic view of demon possession because of movies or theater, or those that are wild and crazy people happening and their heads spin and they spit out green, whatever. But the way that John describes it is not necessarily the habitation of a demon that may be living inside, but definitely owned by the devil. And that, again, if you're listening and that sounds weird, perhaps it's because, number one, we don't know our Bibles, and we don't see this every single day, but the actions of those that are not of the kingdom of God are carrying out the kingdom of the enemy, which it's the devil, Satan is his name.
Yeah.
So in this particular case, this spirit of divination would have been a demon inside of this girl, and the Apostle Paul recognizes it.
Yeah. And can I just say, what a extreme situation of helplessness and hopelessness.
Oh, my word.
For her, that was both possessed in the spiritual world, but also in the physical world with a slavery, a little literal enslavement of not just another individual, which that's terrible enough, but a young child, a young girl.
The whole thing is so sad to me. I think we spent time on that saying, man, don't get caught up in the miracle of, I love the miracle of the jail. I love the miracles that come with the shaking, the earthquake. I love that. But don't forget that there's this girl. And I think for me, what a great reminder, and you can go back a couple of weeks and watch that sermon, but what a reminder that God God remembers the one. He doesn't just remember the masses. He remembers the one. All the while in my mind, I'm thinking Paul didn't want to be in Philippi at this time. He wanted to be in Bithynia, which was north. He wanted to be in Asia, which was west. And God literally let him jump right over Asia and go to Macedonia. And this girl didn't even know, because of her possession and because of her enslavement, she didn't even know help was coming. Mm-hmm. And what a beautiful story. And you know, just we don't know much about her. Kind of like Lydia, we don't know a ton about her. Actually, we know less about her than we do Lydia. But what a great reminder.
Yeah, because we don't have a salvation moment necessarily of her.
Not necessarily, yeah.
Even though that possibly could have happened, possibly didn't happen. I don't see how you can be freed from that, kind of like a Mary Magdalene kind of story of being freed from these demons and then seeing.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't go with the nature of Paul and his desire for the gospel. So most writers, even though it doesn't say, and Paul cast out the spirit of divination and...
Yeah, I don't think it was just a setup for what is about to happen that he's thrown in the prison, and this is the reason why.
Yeah,
I think there's another part of that story that we're just not given. We don't know. We can't preach it that this girl was saved, but I think it leans toward that.
Looking at the history of Paul and the journeys and everybody along the way, that to cast out the spirit and then at some point, somehow, to relay the message of Jesus, of hope, because she still would have been in a hopeless state as a slave girl and one that was demon possessed. So, yeah, the assumption is, and that's why we have a lot of questions in our groups. I love our life groups because they take it a step further, a step deeper. But a lot of questions come up, and we want that. We want questions
absolutely.
of the text.
Well, I don't want to answer every single question in the moment in the sermon.
Oh man, and honestly,
you can't.
I can't because I don't even think of every question. You know, like people will bring up a question. I'm like, that's great. You should have asked that on Sunday morning. You know.
Yeah.
But to think through it and say, why did this happen, or how did that happen, and man, I don't know. And so we kind of want to put the rest of the story together. We had that. Somebody asked a question Sunday morning. What happened to what's the rest of the story with the jailer, his family? Well, we don't really know. Did he? And the question was, did he go on being a jailer? He was such a terrible guy because he put them in the stocks. He beat them. He didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
I know we're jumping all over.
Man, that's prison reform right there.
Right. Yeah. And the warden gets saved.
Yeah.
But we don't know. But perhaps he went back and did his job as a different man. Mm-hmm. And how crazy would that be? Because we know that Paul and Silas went back to the jail at some point because they were released from there. So then the question comes up even in the next part of the story, what about the prisoners, the ones who did not leave when the jail was rocked with an earthquake, and they didn't leave because they wanted to know more. They wanted to see more. They had experienced something that they had never felt or experienced, and it was worth losing out on their physical freedom to see more of this God who they had seen do this miracle. So, man, there's some hard-hitting, encouraging,
lots of great, even just great questions.
Questions.
For me, just enjoy thinking through the what ifs was encompassed in just those two messages, those 2 weeks of just, I wonder what the rest of the story is. Which I think is so encouraging because not that we get lost in it, but I have loved seeing and hearing the response of people of wanting to dive into the scripture. And we've talked about this before, just going through passages like this have just created a knowledge that creates a thirst.
It does.
And whether they go on to become professional theologians or not,
right.
What we want is a desire for the word and desire for the presence of the Spirit in a person's life.
We are hungry for it. Yeah.
So as we go through this, that's one. And again, we could talk about some more things as far as the jailer.
Yeah.
And I know you touched on like worship in there and the importance
Yeah.
of worship, and we can go down that road and talk
there's-
through a lot of those things.
What we're discovering is we had planned. I say we.
Yeah.
We had laid it out a year to go through Acts, and you could easily do
Some
2
insider
years.
information coming right now that we are gonna. It's not gonna be done in a year.
You could easily take 2 years, but we're gonna have it done and probably. Well, actually, we started in February of this year.
Yeah,
And
it wasn't a full.
It wasn't a full year.
Yeah, it
so-
wasn't a full calendar year, but
Yeah, but we've missed a couple of weeks, but then we've also just expanded.
yeah,
Because it's like, man, we need to stop here and just break this down, understanding, because because it's narrative, you want to know,
Yeah.
where do these people end up?
What was it last week? My heart was just breaking for you as you're even just kind of expounding on it on a Sunday morning, and you're like, man, I wish we could just stop here.
I know,
And in the middle of
yeah.
delivery, like I want to talk more.
There are literally times that I will have a sermon laid out, and I'm not trying to push my agenda or anything, but I'll have it laid out, and literally as I'm standing on the stage, I'm thinking, oh no, I wish I would have cut this so that we could just stop. And I can.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Sometimes
yeah.
the hard part for me, I'm still learning how to do this. I'm still learning what I'm doing. So it's like, we need to finish this part to kind of make this come together.
So it doesn't drag on forever and
yeah.
forever and forever.
And also,
But-
it's like, we need to stop right here.
But we
just-
also could
just
stay
talk.
there.
And again, that's what the beauty of, and what you do in helping our life groups to get it, helping our life groups to say, all right, here's where you can just ask any question, flesh it out, go back to the scripture, go back to the sermon, whatever it is, text Darin in the middle of your group or whatever, and I'll do my best to answer it,
Well, I think it is not setting any one individual up or even entire staff up as the hero or the ultimate,
man.
like,
Absolutely.
giver of all information.
Yeah.
We have some absolutely wonderful leaders in our life groups that can find answers, can create deeper discussion, can help with the passion of wanting to kind of further the study of the gospel.
Chad, it's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
yeah.
it is not focused on anybody. This church this church is not focused on the pastor or the staff, or it is focused on the word. And what we're finding, excuse me, is we're finding that when the word is the star, if you will, Jesus is the star of the show. That God the Father giving the word, that's what people are hungry for. They're not hungry for one person or two people or even peripheral things. They're hungry for the word.
And if we continue here's the realization. I have found that the most excited person about the sermon is not sitting on a Sunday morning. The most excited person about the sermon is normally the person giving that sermon.
Yeah.
Because they've done all the work beforehand. Afterward, you pick up those people.
Yeah.
Because they have those questions, or they saw something while something was being preached, and they saw a little bit of information that didn't get touched on in the sermon. Yeah. And there are sometimes we just leave out tiny bits of information because maybe they aren't in the full direction of what we're trying to accomplish in the text. So you bring people along kind of as you go into the sermon and then after the sermon as well. That's where it's really heightened for me, is in the discussion part.
Right.
And so for me as a communicator, sometimes it's hard for me to realize, okay, I'm talking to a group of people that I'm trying to get on my side and to get as excited as I am about this.
Right.
And sometimes it just takes a while.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't even see the result of that.
When do you think
it's
how
in
people
groups.
learn? Like we have churches are full of people that learn in different ways, but we typically present one way of learning, one way of teaching, and expect everybody to learn that way. And so when we don't give another opportunity or opportunities for people to learn the way that they process things, then they miss out. You know, for your auditory learners or people that love sitting, listening, taking notes, they love that, man, then they're doing great. But other people that need to process it or need to do it or discuss it, or maybe it takes them a minute, or they're thinking along with me. I love to talk to people that I literally will say, how would you have preached that point?
Well, they
And
said
they're
that's
like,
the best
"Well, I
way
was
to
thinking
retain
about
information
this." Oh, man.
is through teaching it.
When you're going through it. Yeah.
Because you can hear it, write it down, whatever the other ways are.
Yeah,
But the best way to retain information is when you teach it to someone else.
Man.
And I think that's part of it in life groups is there's that conversation happening. They're talking through it. And so that's the best part of retention.
I love it. It's to me, it's beautiful and grueling. At the same time.
Well, we've discussed personally and on here the difficulties that life groups bring. It's so much easier to open a door on a Sunday night and say, "Hey, come on, and we're going to do another Bible study." As opposed to, "Hey, we've got 250 plus people in a life group that are active in a life group."
Yeah.
And we need more host homes. We need more leaders, and let's train those people up.
More people gathering around
so that
the
we can
Word.
have more people gathering around the Word. And that's a difficult thing, but I think it's working. I think it's working because not because something we came up with. Goodness knows we're not the first ones or the best ones to do it.
Right.
But I think it's what's laid out in the Scripture that as they're meeting from house to house,
Breaking bread.
Yep.
Praying.
So again, it's a scriptural obedience piece that some churches do, some churches don't. I think the Lord is at least blessing our obedience in that aspect.
It's not been easy.
No,
It's been difficult, and it's taken us a long time to even get to this point where we know we don't have things totally figured out, but we feel like we're headed in a direction where, to me, it's about seeing people like you said. The joy of ministry is seeing people get it and then do it, and that's where the joy comes. Instead of we want to make sure that we're not lifting up the teacher, but we're lifting up what's being presented.
Yep.
It's like he is the object of our faith, and he's the object of our conversation, and when that happens, he's going to draw people to himself, and that's what we want to do.
Yeah. Amen.
Exactly.
So this past week was chapter 17, so we've got to cover that.
Well,
do you want to go with something else?
No, I don't want to go with something else.
planned.
I was just reminded, I read a statement from a commentator, Jack Arnold, who was talking about this particular passage, and when Paul and Silas are in Thessalonica. So there's tons of cool stuff in this one as well. We were in verses 1 through 9 where this is the passage where the authorities go looking for Paul and Silas. They've been in the synagogue and they don't find them. So they go and they drag Jason out into the street, and they basically arrest him, and they say, "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here also." So the cool thing about Thessalonica is that Paul writes letters back to them, and it's almost happening in real time, which is crazy because you're like, okay, who are the brothers and sisters in Thessalonica? These guys are very new to the faith, and now they're getting a letter. You know, it's just crazy. But Paul commends them, and Jack Arnold says of the Thessalonians that they were people who were well taught, that Paul had taught them, that others have taught them, and now they are people who are well taught. So much so that they begin taking, if you go to Thessalonians 1:8, they take the gospel to their region, to where Paul and Silas don't have to go to these other places because they're taking the gospel there. And man, what evidence of transformation! Not only we've been talking about like people that are taught and then they teach. But now we're talking about people who hear the gospel and now they take the gospel.
Yeah.
And so, man, we talked a lot about that in our group on Sunday night about sharing our faith, sharing our testimony, and the beauty of that.
Well, what can happen is that we are so much consumers because we love the gospel. We love to hear the word. I love classroom time. I do. I was kind of one of those weird ones. I never tested really well, but I love sitting in conferences and classes and things like that. And I love just hearing knowledge and information, and that can happen. But that's not what's supposed to be the end result.
Yeah.
Like we're supposed to go share that with someone else. And I think a lot of times churches can just get in that place. I say churches and individuals can get in that place where they're okay with just, oh, man, I love my pastor. I love hearing the gospel preached. I love
to go to church.
This style. Yeah. And just, it becomes part of who we are, and that's great, but it never is shared with someone else. And that's not the motive of the gospel. The motive of the gospel, you called it a going gospel, that it is something that is supposed to be mobile at all times, that it's going to some new place.
You look in the Old Testament, excuse me, I'm drinking my pumpkin spice chai tea, and it's got some sugar in it, which I'm not supposed to have, but it makes me, anyway, I love it, but I have to cough.
Okay.
I got the black lung. So when we think about from the Old Testament in Deuteronomy, the process of passing faith generation to generation within one's household. Jesus says, now I want you to take this gospel and I want you to take it to every region. So that's why we say the gospel is moving, it's going, it's transferred by not only, and then again, I taught John today, and so it's not only taught in thought, but also in deed, in how we love people. And so we show the love of Jesus. We tell the truth of Jesus. It's a going gospel. So when we get to Acts, it's like a fire hydrant opened up on us of how the gospel is going. And so every single week, the application is a little bit different, but it's kind of the same. Let's go. Take the gospel, share the gospel, teach the gospel. And as we do that, then God will bring people to himself. And so the same thing is in Thessalonica. And in this week, we'll talk about Berea. And then I think we're going to spend a couple weeks in Athens. And then there's this thing called Christmas that's going to happen that gets in the way of studying Acts, but we'll work through it. You had a solution for that, you know.
I mean, I still stand by it. But, I mean, it is what it is.
How to preach Acts through Thanksgiving and Christmas.
I feel like it worked, but that's just me.
We'll let you share that on another time.
Yeah, because I don't have those in front of me. I'd have to pull those back up. But, yeah, I mean, so that phrase, to me, I think is the key point, and I think you do as well, like that phrase in verse 6, these men who have turned the world upside down have come here also. It's like their reputations had preceded them. Yeah. And then it's like, now they're here.
It's crazy.
What damage to their political climate, to their social climate, to the economic climate. Like everything was being torn down for them. Things that they had planned for their
futures.
Yeah. So, you want to jump into that as far as kind of explain that a little bit, as so what they meant, what they were doing?
The verse 5 in chapter 17 says the Jews were jealous. So we ask the question, why were the Jews jealous? But then they also got the other leaders of the city, which if you do, it's interesting to do a deep dive into the government setup, like from Philippi to even to Thessalonica, because Thessalonica was the capital of Macedonia. It was very modern. Women were exalted in Macedonia, in Thessalonica. They were many of them were in political leadership, and it's just a different feel in Thessalonica than even from Philippi, where the magistrates and the police come and take Paul, throw him in jail. Now you have the city leaders. It's just a different government kind of setup, which is a fascinating study. We don't have time to do that. But we have the Jews who are jealous, so they're mad. Paul is sharing Jesus Christ as the Messiah. They're jealous. Why does Luke say they were jealous instead of saying, but the Jews were angry? Well, it's a different reasoning. It's a different motive. Why are they jealous compared to being angry? Well, jealousy can bring angry, but anger doesn't necessarily bring jealousy. So they were mad. They were upset because Paul was basically taking their religious stronghold and saying, I'm answering the question of Judaism with Jesus Christ. And they were jealous because people, even devout men and women, Greeks and Jews, were following the message of Paul. And it's crazy because when you look at the message of Paul, he not only uses intellectual reasoning, but I believe he also uses an emotional plea as well. Like, I'm going to show you from the scriptures how Jesus is the Messiah, and then I'm going to tell you the story of Jesus, the gospel, and I'm going to tell you how it changed my life. And that story is enough for people to say, I want that. I want what you've got. And God is working in Thessalonica. The Jews are jealous because now their religion is answered, basically. That's my opinion anyway. So they take some men of the city who are kind of like the rabble. I don't know what that means exactly, but I know what it means, but it's just funny because we don't use that word. I don't want to be a man of rabble. They formed a mob, set the city in an uproar, and attacked the house of Jason. So at that point, I used the same point from the last couple of weeks that the gospel confronts. Mm-hmm. When the gospel confronts, it confronts believers and unbelievers. Mm-hmm. It confronts unbelievers in saying there's a problem, and the only answer is Jesus. You can't fix the problem yourself. You're dead in your sin. You need something. And most people are offended by that because they don't want anybody telling them that there's a problem. You have a problem with me? I'm the problem? Yeah. Like, yes, you are the problem, and I'm the problem, and we're all the problem. And our problem is sin, and the only cure is not more cowbell. The only cure is Jesus Christ. He's the way, the truth, and the life. So it confronts also believers because it confronts us to say, let us be people of the book, and people of the book are people of the gospel. So the two main things that I said Sunday was the gospel will never be politically correct. What they did was they said, oh, so these men, they're turning the world upside down. They were not saying spiritually, they were saying you're trying to overthrow the government because you're saying Jesus is king, not Caesar. So it was a politically charged thing. There's a lot of rhetoric that they're spilling at this point, a false narrative that they're spilling in town to try to get the mob going. It's funny how politics have not changed in however many hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years. Politics have not changed. But so they're seeking to turn the world upside down politically, but also culturally. And it says, verse 7, Jason has received them, and they're all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there's another king, Jesus. So they don't understand Jesus did not come to overthrow the government. Jesus would not have instructed his followers, the apostles, to overthrow any governments. As a matter of fact, Jesus said, obey the government. What belongs to Caesar, give to Caesar. But what belongs to God, give to God. And ultimately, the kingdom of God is greater than the kingdom of Caesar. But we're not here to overthrow governments. I'm not establishing a kingdom on the earth. I'm establishing a spiritual kingdom. And so even these men who were declaring this did not even know of what they were speaking. So the gospel will never be politically correct because the gospel, it points to itself, saying you have to go through Jesus Christ for salvation. But not only that, but I said Sunday, it also won't be culturally accepted. And that's simply because the message of the gospel will always upset social, political, and religious norms. Mm-hmm. And that is where a lot of these early believers found when you upset political, social, religious norms, it's going to bring trouble on you. And because that's what Jesus did.
Well, that's where it brings the uncomfortableness of most people, is that most people are set in their way of how they do life, and they don't mind just doing kind of the norm. Yeah. But when you bring in the new of a radicalized religion, mm-hmm. in that sense, that is too far out there, it's upset too many people. Too many people have changed, and that's where they kind of draw the line.
Yeah. To say, I have to change to submit to this gospel, mm-hmm. and I'm unwilling to do that. I'm unwilling to disturb, like the word, when it says these men have turned the word upside down, it means they've disturbed they've disturbed stability. So it's interesting when you look at that, because that's what the gospel does. The gospel disturbs stability as far as social, religious, political norms, but what it does is it stabilizes disturbances in our own lives if you flip it. So we're the ones with the disturbed situations going on, and the gospel stabilizes us, but to the average person, it's disturbing the stability. Mm-hmm. Because we are living for this kingdom of this world, and we ourselves are the kings and queens of this world, when Jesus says, no, we're building another kingdom.
Yep, that's right.
It's fascinating. I love to study it, because the question that we continue to have to ask is what difference is the church making in this world, in this particular kingdom? What difference are we making? Mm-hmm. What are we disrupting, or are we just staying in the social norm? Mm-hmm. Or are we making a difference even in the religious norm? And so I think we need to constantly ask ourselves that question.
Yep.
And that's why figuring out, you take all of what Jesus said and lead up to following Jesus with a simple gospel that even the Philippian jailer understood: believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved. And then taking it a step farther and saying, now love your neighbor as yourself. And when those things happen, we're not just talking about Jesus, we're living as Jesus lived. And that in itself will disrupt social norms.
Mm-hmm. I think we have to constantly ask ourselves, because there's a certain drawing of radical to an individual, like that flamboyant character, that loudspeaker, that attraction drawing, like there's always that. But there's something attractional about being radical or radicalized to a certain extent until it upsets certain people. But I think the question that has to, at least to me, was an automatic response to a message like this is, how much of the world have I turned upside down?
Yeah.
Not saying that I am a Paul, or I am, I don't have the same gifting as he did. But I think that's the application question that I took away with, was how much of have I just kind of fit into the norm versus actually being something that somebody was like, there's something different. That guy's weird in a good way. So that was that application for me. And I think that we all, should be asking that question, because Jesus was kind of that guy.
Yeah.
Jesus was the guy who radicalized. He was the one who upset a lot of people's world. And these guys were too. I mean, a statement was made about him.
These guys who've turned the world upside down. And And it wasn't as though they came in and demanded anything. When at the beginning of this text, it says that Paul went into the synagogue and he reasoned with them for 3 Sabbath days. Mm-hmm. He didn't go in and demand anything. He didn't go in and say, if you don't do this, I'm going to do this. I'm going to cause harm. I'm going to do damage. I'm going to start a riot. He didn't do any of that. He reasoned with them because he knew that the gospel was enough. So when we talk about radical, a lot of times we use that word radical in so many negative ways. We asked that question, about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
What do you think of? Is it positive or negative when you hear the word radical? And a lot of times it's negative. Mm-hmm. We think of radical Islam.
Yep.
We think of extremists. We think of warriors from other either religious or other countries, and they're radical. So when we hear the word radical, it's like, oh man, I gotta live like John the Baptist. Got to live in the woods. Got to wear some kind of sheep's clothing or whatever it is, and eat locust and be the weirdo. No, we're radical because of the message of the gospel.
Right.
It might lead us to do some radical things, such as leave our homes, sell our wealth, sell everything we have and go somewhere. It might lead to doing something radical, but on a daily basis, even the Apostle Paul was radical because of the message that he lived. Mm-hmm. Now, along with that, God did miracles through Paul and Silas because of the message they were giving. They weren't necessarily living these radical, crazy lives. Paul was a tent maker. That's pretty radical. It's like, we find out a little bit more coming up. It's like it wasn't setting out to be radical. His message was radical because it called men and women out of the norm into something supernatural, and that's radical. Mm-hmm. And so getting that mindset that, my prayer, if you hear me talk much, my prayer is that many people will answer the call to take the gospel to unreached people groups. I would love that to see, and I would love to be part of that. But really, the radical nature of the gospel starts in our homes as we share the gospel and teach the principles of Jesus Christ with our kids who are already set out to try to fit in and try to be part of the crowd and to try to do this. And we're teaching them to be set apart. Our lives are set apart for use of God. And then our message is the radical nature of the gospel that says, if you want to come after me, deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me. And that's radical. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because you find in Thessalonica, this isn't just what we would call the lowest of society that was following. Maybe this is an ignorant gospel and only ignorant people follow the gospel. We find devout Greeks who are educated, and we find leading men and not a few leading women of the city. Okay, so Luke is saying, hey, there's some highbrow, what my dad would call highbrowed people in political positions, in religious leadership, in society leadership that are now saying, I believe this gospel. Mm-hmm. And it was all because of the truth, the radical truth of the gospel of Jesus. So lest anyone say, well, Christianity is just for the ignorant among us, because we've been called that. I'll say, you know what, that's fine. Mm-hmm. It's the simplicity of the gospel is enough for me. But man, the gospel is for everyone. Mm-hmm. And when God draws people, it doesn't matter what economic status or anything, their background, God will do his work in them. Oh,
good stuff. So this Sunday, going to what verses?
I have said it about 10 times now, is one of my favorite passages. I'll just say it's one of my favorite passages in Acts chapter 10, verses 10 to 15. How about that?
Chapter 10?
Chapter 17, verses 10 to 15.
Okay.
Paul goes to Berea, and he meets Bereans who are more noble. Don't get me started because I love it. I love it.
Okay, I won't.
And honestly, the Bereans is why I got so deeply into inductive Bible study in my own personal life years ago is because studying the Bereans. And so I love it. So this week could be a little teachy,
Yep.
As we kind of break that down, what it means when they received the word and they examined the word, to be discerning of what's true and what's not. So,
All right. Good.
hey, I threw myself out there as a possible heretic last week, this past Sunday. So, hey, I'm capable of heresy. You guys need to keep me in line.
There's always that chance,
There's a chance.
that I personally will misspeak.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, probably shouldn't have
Oh, man.
said that.
It's like, oh, man.
But when you're in front of people, it tends to happen.
It happens.
Unless
That's why my wife says, stick to the script.
All right. We got one more week of life groups before we end for the year. Pick back up in January. Let's see. What else? Anything else happening in the church? Start season of giving. Yeah.
Yes. Season of giving. We challenged everyone. We want everybody to, or we want all of the kids from Nicaragua to get sponsors. And we're doing well.
Got a few more left.
A few more left. And so that's part of our season of giving is to do that. We're also going to be giving away an offering in December. We want to lead toward that and make
December 15th.
Make that as large as possible. Part of that, we want to go to our missionaries and World Mission Offering. So
Awesome.
yeah.
And you mentioned Friendsgiving
Coming up. Friendsgiving.
on the 17th. So that'll just be a time here on the church property. Try to gather all the life groups all in one place, I guess. And then some if you're not involved in a life group. Hang out, eat a meal,
Bring
play
a
some
game.
games.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
Bring a game.
We'll see how it goes.
Yes. People are already threatening me like, like, hey, I'm going to bring this game and I'm going to beat you. Like, I've never heard of that game.
Yeah.
Crazy.
You got to explain the rules for 45 minutes and then play for 7 hours.
Sorry, I don't know what it is. You know what I'm saying?
I found there's a lot of different ways people play that game.
That's true. Yeah, my mom was the queen of sorry.
Oh, yeah?
She would cheat, all the time to win. She was not like, I'll let you win.
We're not game players. We play Go Fish and Uno.
Oh, yeah.
Uno Attack.
Oh, man. Where it spits it out at you.
Yep. That's about the extent of the Mentor household games.
Yeah, I stay away from games that get too angry. Well, no, people get angry because I win all the time.
Oh. All right. You heard it here.
Heresy.
Start wagering on some church
right.
board games. We're going to be playing bingo before you know it. All right. Well, thanks for joining us this session. Finishing up episode 30. Jump in next week.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. We'll see you. Thanks, Darin. Oh, yeah.